Hi, everybody. This is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, interviews with the living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week, our guest is very special. His name is Ed Martin, and he's the vice president of Hartsdale Pet Cemetery, the oldest operating pet cemetery in the world, and a business his family has owned and operated since 1974. As a teenager, Ed spent his summers working at Hartsdale cutting grass, planting flowers, digging graves, and running errands to buy cigarettes and coffee. And then after college, he dabbled as an attorney and a certified public accountant, but eventually he returned home to Hartsdale, where he considers his true calling in life. In his spare time, Ed plays keyboards in several Grateful Dead cover bands and runs a Grateful Dead fan account on Instagram that is dangerously close to having 50,000 followers. Let's hope by the time this is released, he gets the bump he wants and deserves. And he also practices yoga daily and is forever crafting playlists on Spotify. So I can't wait to talk to Ed because I am from the Bay Area. I'm a huge Grateful Dead fan, and I also am just dying to ask questions about a pet cemetery. So Ed, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for the introduction. Great to be here, Mike.
Absolutely. And our standard 3 questions we ask every guest before we even get started is just how old are you? Where did you grow up? Because I don't know where Hartsdale Pet Cemetery is. And what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Okay. So my age, I'm 57 years old. I grew up in a small town called Bronxville, New York. It's about 30 minutes north of Midtown Manhattan. And what was the third question? I lost track already.
Yeah, that's fine. What generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
I guess baby boomer. I guess I was born in 1966, so I guess baby boomer.
Yeah, I think you're right on the cusp of the Gen X baby boomer.
Yeah,
so.
Just right on the line there. Yeah.
And I have heard of Bronxville, but only because I lived in Ithaca and spent a lot of time in New York City where my brother lives. So.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah.
But and is Hartsdale Pet Cemetery in that area?
Yes, it is. Hartsdale it's about 45 minutes north of Midtown Manhattan.
Cool. All right, we're going to ask questions in a random order because that's how I do things. So I want to get into the Grateful Dead stuff first just because it's fun and it'll warm us up.
Fire away.
I think I was 13 when Jerry died, and I lived in the Bay Area, so when he died, it was like, blackout curtains, like society stopped, and it was a huge deal. And I was young, so I remember just being shocked that like they were that important. And then as I got older, I fell in love with their music, and I was so sad that I never got a chance to see them before that because, they played pretty regularly. So my first question to you is, did you get to see them play live before Jerry passed away?
Plenty of times. Yes, I did.
Awesome.
I started seeing them in, my first concert was in 1986
Cool.
At RFK Stadium, right before Jerry had the coma, the first scare. So that was almost the first and last. And I got into them in a reverse way. My brother had seen them. My younger brother actually had seen them a few times, and before I saw them live, I was actually collecting their tapes, and I kind of got. Most people, it's reversed for them. Most people see their concerts and then start having a big tape collection. And for me, it was the opposite. I was collecting tapes, and then I finally did get a chance to see them. So
that's awesome. And were you playing keyboards like long before you fell in love with them?
Yes. I have been playing the piano since, I don't know, since like 4th grade or something. Took a hiatus to play the drums because that's always fun and cool to do when you're a teenager. And since my brother also played the drums, when it was time to go to college, and we shared the same drum set. So when it was time to go to college, I let him take them because I played 2 instruments, and I just kind of focused on the piano from that point on time.
That's awesome. So is like Pigpen kind of a hero of yours, or are you ever...
I like them all. I kind of incorporate all of their styles. Pigpen's, Keith Godchow, Brent Midland, Vince, and Bruce Hornsby. Kind of try and do them all.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So it's like not weird to grow up around death the way you did, but it's also totally weird. Like it depends on what culture you're from and how you grew up. So was it like odd when your friends and stuff would meet you and you're like, oh yeah, my parents own Hartsdale Pet Cemetery?
Yeah. So, when you're a teenager, you just want to blend in. You not want to be different. So, a lot of my friends are, what does your dad do? Well, my dad's a doctor. My dad is, whatever, a banker. And, my dad is, owns a pet cemetery. What? So, that was a definitely different, thing. And, but I found as I got older, people are just like, wow, that's cool. Like I'm in a cocktail party and I say I work at a pet cemetery. My family owns a pet cemetery. Like, I want to talk to you and I want to talk to the banker. I'd rather talk to you. You sound much more interesting. So
I totally agree. I would make a beeline to talk to you at any dinner party. I'd be like, wow. Okay, so I'm a huge lover of animals, all of them. I'm pretty much like a practicing vegan at this point. So I love what you do, and I absolutely like respect it. I also know that whenever I tell people I did hospice, they look at me like, "How could you do that?" So it's kind of weird that I'm asking you, "How could you do that?" Because I just had two dogs pass away within 6 months of each other. One I'd had for 14 years. The other was like my first dog after him, and then we found out she had a fatal heart condition, and she died 6 months later. So I think, grieving for an animal for me is actually harder than for a human, which might piss off my audience, but it just is. There's like this weird difference, and the goodbye isn't the same. So like, how is it on your end? Like, how much of that like energy do you have to like deal with from your clients and stuff? Is that hard for you?
Well, first, let me start by saying, expressing my condolences for both of your losses, because
Oh, thank you.
you're welcome. I've experienced pet loss myself, and I kind of sort of recently in 2020 I lost my dog Violet,
Oh.
and so I kind of gained a whole new appreciation of what people go through when they lose a pet. And it's really opened my eyes to it. It made me. I mean, I was already sensitive to it, having worked here as long as I have, but it made me even more sensitive and more able to relate to the people, what they're going through when people lose a pet. I see it not as it's not, for me. It's not difficult.
Mhm.
I see it as being a human being and being compassionate to somebody. So I don't see it as something that is, a gloomy or difficult thing. I feel like I'm just helping somebody, and there's a lot of satisfaction in being able to help somebody, and that's why I love my job so much.
That's so cool. That's such a great answer. And I think I mean, it's so like redundant to even say it, but that really is, as I get older, I'm 42, like all I can really put my finger on is that's the meaning of life, is just helping other people. And it sounds like I'm trying to virtue signal or some BS like that, but you know how it is. It's just, it actually is true. It really feels good. And so, speaking of that, like, what was did both your parents like equally start the cemetery, or was one more into it? And can you kind of give us like the history of how they decided to open it and all that?
Yes, I can. And I just wanted to go back to one thing
Oh,
you said
sure, please.
before, because it comes up a lot actually. And you said that, did you say you lost both of your parents,
No, no, my pets, not my parents. Sorry.
your pets?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, or maybe you said there are humans that passed away
Yeah,
that
I
you
just think
felt
it's
you
like
so bad
harder
about.
to like say goodbye to an animal than a human is what I was trying to say. Like when you're in the room with the animal before you euthanize them, which is the case for me both times, or even if you're just saying I had a different dog pass and I didn't go to the room with him, but like it's just different. Like saying goodbye is what I was trying to talk about.
Okay, very much. No, because one thing a theme I've heard here is people have told me, I've lost my pet, and I've lost either one of my parents or both my parents, and I've had a more difficult time with losing my pet, and I feel guilty about that.
Yeah, yeah.
And the first thing I can say to people about that is that you're not the only one I've heard of. Like, I hear it a lot more than you think, actually.
Yeah.
And and I think and that may sound shocking to people that either don't have a pet, or maybe haven't, or have lost their parents and haven't lost a pet yet. But I guess, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have both of my parents, so I haven't experienced that yet. Um, but my response to that is that it's different. It's like apples and oranges.
Mm.
Um, what people go through when they lose their pet, it's different, because our pets are with us every day, and we see them every day, and their schedules are such a big part of our lives. We feed them, we play with them, we walk them, and then when they pass away, and they're almost like children, to us, because
Yeah.
in our caregiving, and when they pass away, first of all, I don't think anybody really anticipates how much they're going to grieve after their pet passes, especially when it's their first pet. I think it surprises them how much their pet has become a part of their family, and that's really what the loss is they've lost a family member. And so the grief, typical thing, when the more love there is, the more grief there is going to be. So when you've bonded with a pet for as long as you have, and you have this schedule that's so part of your life, when your pet passes, that schedule ends, and all of the routines you have with your pet that you no longer have are a reminder of what you lost. And And so they're just triggers for sadness all the time. And it really it's just adjusting your life to your new schedule. And so in the beginning, after you lose your pet, the first couple of weeks, it's super hard. It does get better over time, but what you're really adjusting to in the beginning, at least, is the adjustment of your life and your schedule of not having your pet, because everything is a trigger for what you lost.
Yeah, that's so well said, and I'm so glad that we circled back to that, because that really is like a huge issue. Wow, yeah. So now, do you mind getting into the history of how your parents came up with the idea and opened it?
Definitely. Okay. So, first of all, my family is not the first family that's been here. My family is the third family that's been at Hartsdale. Hartsdale was started by a veterinarian in 1896. The cemetery was his summer home at the time, and the way it really started was most of his clients. He was in New York City, and most people who lived in New York City did not have a backyard where they could bury a pet. And cremation really wasn't that prevalent in the late 1800s. So what people were doing when their pet died, because they really had no other option, was to leave their pet on the curb with trash, and that is not acceptable for most people. This vet started hearing more and more, I can't bear the thought of that. And so he started offering his summer home, which is in Hartsdale, was a very rural, like, apple orchard. And he said, if you meet me at my summer home, I'll have your pet buried here. And they repeated this a few times. So the story goes, he was mentioning the story casually over lunch to a friend of his who was a reporter for the New York Times. And the New York Times reporter said, "Wow, that would make such a great public interest story," and he wrote about it. And then there was more. There was more interest. Oh, well, I think I'd like to have that done, and so that's kind of the way it started, kind of organically like that. After Dr. Johnson passed away in the late 1930s, early 1940s, there were two local families that lived in Hartsdale that took over the ownership of the cemetery. And they moved into what was Dr. Johnson's summer home, and they ran the cemetery hands-on, because Dr. Johnson was running it from his office in Manhattan, where his vet practice was. So these two families ran the cemetery until 1974. There was, over the years they had retired, some had passed away, and there was really just one person that was left. Her name was Irene Lassen. And she was looking to get out. She was looking to retire. She had a son who did not have an interest in getting into the pet cemetery. So my grandfather, who was my dad's father, he had a monument business. And one of his main clients was the Hartsdale Pet Cemetery. Oh. And so Irene Lassen approached my grandfather and asked him if he would be interested in purchasing or running the cemetery. But he was almost as old as she was, and he was looking to retire soon. So he offered up my father, who was a CPA, and said, well, you can talk to my son maybe about retirement planning. And that was under the premises that they met, that my dad was going to give her some retirement planning advice and tax advice and so forth and so on. But when they met, they really hit it off well. My dad always wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and obviously, loved pets. And I think Irene Lassen trusted my father because of my grandfather. And she asked him if he would run the cemetery. Of course, my father said, well, I don't have the money to buy the cemetery. And she said, well, it's more important to me that I pass the cemetery on to someone I trust than the money. You can pay me over time. And so my dad enlisted one of his childhood friends, Pat Grosso. The two of them got together. They put up whatever capital they had, and the rest was as a note, which they paid off over time. They brought in my grandmother as the secretary, the person that met with people to, when they lost their pet. That was the first person they would speak to. Mm. My uncle, my dad's brother-in-law, worked here administratively in the office. Pat Ross's brother came in as the foreman, the supervisor for the grounds. And so it continued to be run as a family business over the years. So my dad's been here since 1974, almost 50 years. Pat Rosso has since retired. And I personally have been working here. Basically, I started working here when I was 14 years old. As soon as I had my working papers, and I was as I said, and as you said in the opening comments, that I was cutting grass and running errands and things like that. And so I'm basically a mailroom employee right up to now I'm the vice president. So I've kind of worked every aspect of Hartsdale.
That's awesome. And so one of the pivotal questions of our podcast is, what do you think happens when you die? So I'd love to ask you that now and then kind of relate it to maybe how much that's changed or has to do with your professional career. So what do you think happens to you specifically, Ed, when you die?
Hey, everyone. If you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
You mean, will I be laid to rest at Hartsdale? Is that what the question is? Or are you just asking metaphysically what happens?
Let's go with metaphysical.
Is there an afterlife? Are we talking afterlife? What are we getting into here?
That was the funniest response I've ever heard to my question, and I thank you so much for that. I'm still laughing. Let's go with metaphysical.
Well, this is just, what I believe. I'm sure, everyone has a different flight. I do believe there's an afterlife. I believe we'll be reunited with our loved ones, and that includes our pets.
That's awesome. And did you ever at any point in your life have a different philosophy, or has it pretty much been since childhood that you believe that?
I think I've always had that belief. It's optimistic, and that's the way I am generally. So I do hope that I'll be reunited with people that are no longer on at least in this life. So
cool. I like that a lot. And I'm curious about part of your career, because it's a small part of the bio you sent me that I read, but it's not a small thing to get certified and pass the bar, and also to become a certified public accountant. So how many years did you spend pursuing both of those? And do you ever miss doing either?
I don't miss those. I love what I'm doing so much right now. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, my years spent. I never really practiced law. I went to law school, but I never practiced law. I was in a public accounting firm. I worked for Pricewaterhouse, and then became PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Oh yeah.
And I learned a ton there about organizational skills and client and service and everything. I learned very important business skills there that I'm really glad that I have. But I really love what I'm doing here, and that is helping people. It's meaningful. It fills my soul, and I'm really happy that I have this as my job, my career. It's hard to even call it a job because I don't consider it that. And
actually, only because I didn't even think about this, but when COVID occurred, did it affect your industry? Were there special laws passed? How did that work?
Well, we were essential. I guess most people, if you want to call it the death industry, were essential workers. So I did come into work every day during COVID. We had to modify what we did. Part of our service is we provide you can view your pet prior to the burial or cremation taking place. And so I guess I should start by saying we don't force anyone to do anything they don't feel comfortable doing. But but most people do want to say farewell to their pet, and so we have a private viewing room which affords people that opportunity. So with COVID, we were not able to have them do that because of social distancing and everything. So we would have the viewings were done outside at the graveside, as opposed to indoors like we usually had. The dedicated viewing room.
Wow, I mean that's cool. I'm very glad that you were considered essential, and I think it's. Maybe it sounds cliche, but it's like. It's weird to be like brave to go to a place where you're going to help people who are grieving and bereaving, but like also you're going to be running a risk of getting sick. So I find that like noble in a certain way. So thank you.
Sure. You're welcome. I mean, some people, we had to be creative with it too. Another way we did it was some people didn't want to come here because they were afraid, and rightfully so. So I was like, why don't we do FaceTime burial?
Oh,
so
cool.
we would do the FaceTime viewings also. And that worked for some people as well.
That's awesome. Before we kind of close things out, I would love to know if you have like any particular stories you like to share. Like you mentioned at a cocktail party, do you have like a funny one or a very moving one, or maybe both? It's up to you.
There is a moving one that there so as I think I told you, there are humans that are buried here at Hartsdale, probably about 800 humans that are buried here. And we're talking about ashes, not human bodies. We're not licensed to bury human bodies.
Okay.
But during COVID, we received a phone call from somebody who was an executor of an estate, and he was carrying out the will. And it was a woman from Mexico that wanted to be buried here. And so I asked all the usual questions. I said, well, is any family member going to come to select the plot location? And he said, no. And usually that's very unusual. Usually if a human's going to be buried here, usually there are many family members that attend the burial or pick out the plot. And that was not the case here. And I said, is anybody going to attend the burial or select the monument or anything like that? And the answer was no to all of those questions. So I was scratching my head wondering how someone who lived in Mexico knew about Hartsdale Pet Cemetery and wanted to be buried here. And no one really had an answer. So, we just did what we were told. We carried out the will as it was intended to be. About a year later, I got a call from the attorney and that I had dealt with on this. And he said, I was talking to a friend of this person that passed away. And she seemed to recall that this person had a teenage son who passed away in the 70s or 80s, and that he had been cremated along with his family dogs, and they were buried at Hartsdale Pet Cemetery. He said that what I told him was that doesn't seem possible because New York State just allowed human burial just within the past 10 years, so that's not possible. So I said, well, actually, that's not true. We've been doing human burial since the 1920s. New York State came in and stopped, put a cease and desist onto that, but that was only for 9 months. So the last name was an unusual name. I did a search in our database and I got a hit. And and then I went out to where the plot was located, and there was a headstone that had her son's name on it, the two pets' names, and her first name was on the stone as well. So clearly, she had wanted to be buried with her son. But she just didn't. She wasn't specific about it enough in the will. So I suggested that we bury her with her son. So we disinterred her urn and we moved it to be so she could be reunited with her son. So to me, it was a very touching story, and just by the stroke of luck, by that person making that inquiry and then the lawyer bothering to even call me about it, we were able to all piece it together and make sure that she was buried with her son.
That is so moving and so beautiful. Wow. I'm so glad I asked that you told that. That's really beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
That made my heart lift. Thank you. The last thing we always have with our guests is we just give you the floor to give whatever message you want. It doesn't have to have anything to do with your career or anything like that, but what would you like to say to our audience?
I guess I would just say when somebody loses a pet, sometimes people are a little judgy. Sometimes people are, oh, it was just a pet. You can get another pet, or why don't you get over it? You'll be okay. I think that, or why are you spending so much money on burying your pet or on cremating your pet or whatever memorialization you're doing? It's very judgy. And I've had people who are friends of mine actually who had those feelings. And then when their own pet died, they said to me, I never realized what how valuable your service is. It's not so much, we can dig a grave or sell you a monument or do a cremation for you, but really the whole thing is it's to try and to get you through the grief. We all grieve so differently, and it's so individual. And it's really just, as I said before, being a human being and being compassionate. Don't be so judgy, and just be there for someone when they have a loss, whether it's a pet or a human.
So well said, and thank you so much. I absolutely love that entire explanation, and I think it is weird that people don't get that. I didn't grow up like that, but I definitely, the first time I lost my first dog, I mean, it was right after I'd lost my grandfather, and that's what I was kind of comparing to when we were talking earlier, is it was just so different. So thank you, Ed, not only for coming on the show, but thank you for doing what you do. And to everyone who listens at home, the best way to support the show is to head over to MikeyOpp.com. That's MikeyOpp.com, and you can sign up for the weekly email that I will send you, which sends you a fun philosophical essay as well as the weekly announcement for the podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.